there is a lot of negative connotation around it, especially if you use things like deepfakes. But if seen from like a positive light, they can help you balance your data set. There are so many instances or scenarios you might not see in real life, but when you deploy your models at large or at scale, you really want them to be prepared. Some sort of like all-rounded education, if you may say so. So it's necessary how you could leverage synthetic data to fill in those gaps.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Jigyasa Grover to the Data Bytes podcast. She is the lead of AI and research at Bordeaux AI. Previously, is a Google Developer Advisory Board member. She was recently prior to this episode. I was just watching her because she was featured in the 2024 Google I/O, which is really cool. Go check her out on YouTube. But has worked extensively in the machine learning and data science space for high tech, along with being the author of the book Sculpting Data for ML. Jigyasa, welcome to the Data Bytes podcast. So you have worked in the field for quite a few years. So you have experience way before the Gen AI boom and authored the book, as I mentioned, Sculpting Data for ML, the first act in machine learning, really talking about all the data preparation process that goes into machine learning, and now even Gen AI. Can you talk a little bit more about why is data quality so crucial for developing these effective models? And how do we maintain high quality data sets, particularly for Gen AI projects today?
Thank you so much for having me, Say. Yeah, absolutely. I think prior to the whole boom in the world of Gen AI and people started focusing a lot on like LLMs and so on, there was a shift and a trend coming towards data-centric AI or data-centric machine learning, where the whole idea was garbage in, garbage out. So you really had to focus on the quality of data. And in my work, especially as well, like curating and maintaining high quality data set is highly important, and it begins with a thorough understanding of not only the data's source but also the context. And there are a lot of strategies we implement, including starting with robust data collection with a focus on privacy preserving the users and the people we are collecting the data from or the sources. They should be well aware of the fact that their data can be used to leverage or propel machine learning or AI. Other than that, to mitigate bias, we also need to ensure there is a diverse and an unbiased representative sample. So a lot of tools, technologies go behind it, and there should be a lot of thought. And mostly it involves like having diverse and credible sources, doing thorough data analysis and data cleansing, having experts involved. I feel like having human in the loop is of the utmost important. We haven't reached a stage yet where we can, just leave it all to the machine. So a lot of quality assurance, human in the loop, and ethical compliance, automation. These are some strategies we should definitely keep in mind as we focus on the data quality.
How does the rise of synthetic data play into data curation and data quality? Is this a matter of like if your data's trash, just go and create synthetic data for what you want in your model? Or how do you start to think about synthetic data in the context of that data quality and curation for your models?
I see synthetic data creation from a positive angle. There is a lot of negative connotation around it, especially if you use things like deepfakes. But if seen from like a positive light, they can help you balance your data set. There are so many instances or scenarios you might not see in real life, but when you deploy your models at large or at scale, you really want them to be prepared. Some sort of like all-rounded education, if you may say so. So it's necessary how you could leverage synthetic data to fill in those gaps and provided the scenarios where in real life it might not have happened till now, but it could. Think of like self-driving cars and so on. So, some sort of crashes that you've not captured yet, but they could happen. So you could leverage synthetic data to create those kind of training examples for your models.
In the realm of Gen AI, many companies are just using the standardized models or even some of the open source models from like Llama and the language 2 or large 2, which just came out from Mistral, or you can use more of the closed source models from like OpenAI and Google. In that regard, you're not responsible for the training of those large models, but maybe you add on to it with some fine tuning or using a RAG methodology. Do you think that because most companies won't have to do the overall training of like the base model, that they can get away with some less quality data, or it's still essential even as you add in those fine tuning measures and RAG methodologies on top of it?
All of these companies, especially the ones that are leveraging pre-trained models, regardless of the methodology that you're using, I still believe there is no getting away. You need to focus on having quality data but there is also certain experiments that have shown that these language models, they can work well with lesser quantity and even lesser quality of data since they are trained on such humongous amounts of data already. They know the ins and outs, and they can identify patterns. But from our perspective as responsible developers, and someone who's come from like a data-centric machine learning and user-centric design approaches, I definitely focus on quality.
At Bordeaux AI, you lead AI in research. Can you talk a little bit more about what some of those projects look like that you're working on? And, as a lead for AI in research, what do you see as some of the biggest pain points that we have to overcome in the industry today?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Bodo AI, we are aiming to build like a conversational, explainable, context-aware data conversational tool, primarily geared towards organizations who might not have enough talent or enough resources to do data analysis and also make things quicker. So the whole agenda is to focus on informed decision making backed by data-driven evidence. And in doing so, we are leveraging a lot of state of the art language models. One of the biggest pain point I'd see is how to curate this user centric design and very intuitive interface where you're not pressing a lot of buttons and there are a lot of like pathways, but you are context aware and the model or the tool itself is able to provide you, let's say, with relevant next steps and recommendations and guide you through the whole process with least human intervention or just like a few guidatory points from humans. And the second aspect is the whole explainability. Language models for us as are nothing but black boxes. So, how do you curate that element of explainability and provide interpretation, and especially to the end users, like this is what we took, and this is why you're getting this particular answer, and you can directly use this. So to have that kind of trust built in for the users to use our results as is in making decisions, which could be of huge impact, maybe on their organizations or on the personal level. So that is another pain point that we're dealing with and working towards the solution one day at a time.
One of the biggest fears I would say that I see for individuals, particularly using like large language models or other, AI assisted devices, is my data private and secure? And I can imagine, particularly too, and having these like AI assistants for analysis, typically doing analysis, you're really digging into the details and looking at private data, whether that be about your customers, financial metrics, really proprietary data about that organization. How do you make sure that that privacy and security is added on as a layer into this analysis, because it will only be as good if as the data that you provide into it and can analyze. And so for that you need to have a layer of trust. What does that look like in these models?
Yeah, 100%. Especially if you use all of these closed source models published, there is this level of concern that usually comes up with a lot of these organizations who have confidential or sensitive information they do not want to relay. though there are a lot of ZDR, zero data retention policies being published around these models or APIs, there's still a hesitation, a sense of hesitation for these folks to, send their data to another third party and, let them do, the analysis on it or like even provide them guidance. So there's a lot of research we are doing internally. It's starting with like masking, tokenization, or data anonymization techniques. We are also researching a lot of these open source models which you can self-host, so you don't really have to rely on third party services. But there's also a fact that benchmarking, so a lot of these open source models, they though they might claim that they're built from the same technology as a similar organization's closed source model, but you can clearly see the difference based on the experiments. Again, a lot of research is going on how to improve that or customize it. There's another route a lot of folks also focus is following, fully managed services or employing them. But then, what if someone's not comfortable with a particular language model or they have affinity towards the other? So, trying to build this plug and play kind of model where it doesn't really matter what model you're using as long as you're comfortable with, its terms and conditions. Uh, but a lot of research is definitely ongoing, focusing on how to secure their secrets uh, by leveraging generative AI, which is not their own particular model. So, yeah, as I said, one day at a time.
One of the things, though, that's great about what's happening in the Gen AI space in particular is we're seeing more open source models, with what Meta's building and Mistral. I know you've been actively involved in open source project, including the Google Summer of Code. What motivates you to continue to contribute to the open source community? And what do you find most rewarding about it? Because these are not, contributing to open source is not typically a paid position. It's something that people do out of love and for their free time. So, what motivates you to contribute to open source?
Yeah, I think at this point I've been associated and contributing, collaborating with the world of open source for 10 plus years. And it started as a journey of learning, which turned into a journey of contributing back to the community that had given me so much. And I call it the snowball effect. And I've shared it with like so many people around me as well that when you immerse yourself in one opportunity, a lot of these others follow as you network and talk to other people. And in my life personally, I have seen it, happen so many times. I was involved in one community and opportunities came on, so contributing to open source for me is just a way of giving back to the community that has propelled my educational journey, my professional journey so much. And that is why I term it as a very powerful catalyst. Definitely it's a two-way street. I'm giving back to the community, but in turn I'm also learning so much about the working of these projects, and I just get to learn something new, even though I might not be, let's say, contributing on the daily, full time job. It just takes away so much from here. But whenever I have the chance these days, I definitely make sure that I'm mentoring people getting started with open source, because open source is just not code. Like, contributing to open source is not just coding on projects. There's so many other ways. So I also give a lot of talks at meetups telling how open source is way beyond code. You can, contribute to ethics and standards and helping with testing, QA, and so much more. Even testing and opening issues in an open source repository, I would consider it contributing because you're contributing in a meaningful way. And it has been a rewarding journey. I've, been collaborating with Google and their open source community with GCI, which is Google Code in, focused more towards open source contributions for high school students, and then Google Summer of Code, which is more towards university or post university. And these days, they've even done away with these restrictions that you don't really have to be a university student to contribute, because so many people after high school they directly go on to working. So I really appreciate this fact, and working as a mentor has been a fulfilling journey. I'm able to guide and support talents from so many countries all across the world. You don't really have to be physically present to help them grow in their careers or help them find different avenues they can grow their career in. I remember having students and learners or contributors from so many different countries, and I would collaborate with them. And on our one-on-ones, I would just also get to know about their working temperament, their cultures, and so much more. So I feel it's been a two-way street, definitely rewarding and exciting as well.
For those who want to get started in open source, can you just explain a little bit more how it works in general? And then how do you get started doing what you're doing, right? And what are the ways to contribute beyond just, contributing through code, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so I get this question often, and it's definitely a daunting task. The first step is always the hardest. So, what I recommend, anyone who is looking to get started with is there's so many programs out there that help you make that first leap of faith. So, either join meetups or solely focused on open source. And so many programs, as I mentioned, Google Summer of Code, Outreachy, and so on, that help you make that first plunge. But the repository, let's say you go on GitHub and you really like a project, or you're working with some of the modern day libraries or framework. And that is how I actually started. I was in a library 10 years ago, scrolling through the limited amount of internet we usually got back then. Um, and I came across Pharaoh. And for me, Pharaoh was mummies, Egyptian mummies, and so on. But little did I know, after I did my research, that Pharaoh was an open source integrated development environment, IDE, and an editor rolled into one, made in Smalltalk. I was really intrigued. I honestly, that was my first contribution to open source, and it only began because I was intrigued by the name Pharaoh. I went to IRC and simply asked, "Hey, I'm new. I'd love to know more about Pharaoh." So there are so many helpful mentors out there who will, point you to the right direction, saying, "This is the tutorial to get set up or like to get started." And you can follow through these basic steps to, get your environment set up and practice a couple of examples. Taking that first step and having the courage to jump is, I would say, the most difficult task in your open source journey. So don't be afraid. I'd say, particularly in AI and data science, there is such a broad tech community these days, and everyone's willing to help. It just takes little effort from your end. And I would suggest that coding is not the only way. You can start with documentation. It is really easy because documentation, again, it's a learning process, not only for yourself, but you're explaining it in such a way that someone new who would be joining or onboarding would also understand it. You can create tutorials. That is also a great way to contribute to open source. You can open issues, do a lot of bug sorting. So many people, they open issues saying this is not working, or they engage in conversations. So helping those people out is also a way to not only connect with like-minded professionals and make friends. I have done that. I came across someone while I was solving an issue, and uh, he became such a good friend of mine. And he lives in a completely different part of the world. And accidentally or coincidentally, I'd say, I was traveling there, and we met first time in person after 7 years of just hanging around on a GitHub thread. So that is a way you build network, and ultimately that person ended up inviting me to a conference he was organizing at his hometown, and so on. So definitely recommend. It fosters collaboration and mentorship. You are not like, oh, you are a mentor, you cannot be a mentee. So it's a two-way street. You can learn while learning yourself.
I love that you can get part of a project just by liking the name of something, right? So it just goes to show, like, just go out there and search if there's a language that you really enjoy, or a model that you really enjoy, or a name that you're attracted to. That's a great way to be able to dive in. In your opinion, having been in the open source community for a while, what do you think that open source provides to the ecosystem that other kind of either closed source models or closed source languages can't do?
I think it's a great way to foster collaboration from people all across the world. You're not just geographically um, centered. And also, it democratizes access to these cutting edge technologies, especially like Gen AI. There's a sense of transparency that you're not doing something that you shouldn't be doing in your models. So, it promotes uh, having reproducibility and trust in these AI systems, which is of the utmost importance these days, since AI is being wielded everywhere. You know, not only the most used, but also the most abused domain at this point. So it can impact someone's life. So having that some sort of trust and transparency is definitely helpful. And also the fact that accessibility plays a big role. You don't really want your model just to be accessible to English speaking countries. So having, multilinguality built in, having these advanced AI tools, even not just language, like beyond language, there's so many things like colloquial and clangs and so many things that you might not know if you're not collaborating with people all across the world. And open source is a great way to collaborate because there is a lower barrier to the entry. You don't really have to be working somewhere to contribute to that model. And it facilitates a lot of rapid iteration. So these are a lot of different opportunities that open source brings to generative AI. But then there are also challenges. If you think from other perspective, is if you open your model to all to contribute, there's a sense of like quality control, like who's maintaining like what is going in and what is and who is keeping a check. There is like a standard authority or a group of people who are monitoring it. Uh, that is definitely a challenge. And the second is security. People can make clones of that model and have custom layers on top that might not be doing really good things or something that shouldn't be done again. So that is another challenge. You can also think about sustainability. Like open source projects, to be honest, they require a lot more effort to keep the contributors encouraged and have that sort of pace in their development velocity. Uh, because many times I've seen open source projects, they start at a very good note and then they abruptly end because people just lose interest. And since they're not technically getting paid to contribute, it is very easy to lose interest. And same goes the other way. Some projects, they don't take off and suddenly they take off and again they abruptly shut down. So a lot of these facts have to be keep in mind. I feel like having a balance, just how TensorFlow has been done. It started with, uh, Google backing it. So there are a certain set of people actively maintaining it while having a part of it open source so that, general people can also contribute to it, open issues and help with documentation. But yeah, so I feel that model is much more sustainable.
Yeah, I'm curious, you mentioned a little bit about how some projects can take off and then some can kind of fizzle out. What do you think makes an open source project really succeed to gain that momentum and that energy around it that the community wants to continue to still add to it, expand on it, and it continues to grow?
I feel like it's not like one size fits all. I have seen different models working, but one thing that definitely lies at the heart of it is interaction between all the members and having, let's say, a Slack workspace open to all where anyone can pop in and do a conversation which doesn't really involve talking about the project specifically or opening issues and just like focusing on resolving them. Having that sense of community really helps. Um, and the second thing that I've seen is backing by like a big organization or a big company because they keep, the lights on at all times, even when some of the contributors are not able to help. They are the ones that maintain and, maintain the quality control and make sure that it's sustainable. And the third thing is documentation. If you don't really have a good project where, new contributors are not even aware of like where do they start, what's the starting point, then that becomes like a very big barrier for entry. And open source projects are like a cycle. Contributors come and go. It's not like, and there are only few contributors who will like stay throughout the lifetime. Like that's what I've seen, and I think it's totally fine. Like that's how life works. So in order to make sure that there's good onboarding and offboarding processes, is really important, and documentation plays like a pivotal role there.
Your career has spanned across various roles and organizations from major tech companies to academic institutions. What are some of the key decisions or moments that have shaped your journey in AI and data science?
I thoroughly believe in the snowball effect, and the key points in your life that completely change your life and how it would have been. And the first and foremost definitely would be getting intrigued by the name Pharaoh. And I said, because that was my first, introduction to the world of open source, even to the word open source, honestly. I didn't really know what it meant back then. So that changed. I got into the world of open source, started contributing, and uh, luckily I got very good mentors who guided me throughout the process of onboarding. So that was a key moment. And throughout, that contributing process, I got to know about this program called Google Summer of Code, and back then, it wasn't really that of a popular program as it is these days. So I got into that program, and the first thing that I worked on was building, these desktop widgets and tools. Really interesting, but I enjoyed my journey. And I was also doing a lot of like Android app and web app development back then. Nothing related to AI and data science. Like that wasn't in my life back then. And what happened was the next year I applied to the same program again, but this time the project was more of like scraping data from some websites and aggregating it and making some sort of like a search application. That was the first time I got introduced to the you know term called NLP, natural language processing, by, scraping data and so on. So again, intrigued me, and I started taking more courses in university to learn about natural language processing, machine learning. So that was my introduction to the world of AI and data science. That is when I decided I wanted to pursue a PhD, because by then I had done a couple of research internships, read a lot about internet, and thought about how I wanted to do this full time. And I really like the world of AI and open source and data science, so I could marry all of these together. The next shift came when I went to a pre-doctoral summer school in Germany. It was organized by Cornell and Max Planck, and they gave like a rundown of like how things are in PhD. This is how your next 5 to 6 years of life would look like. I'd already gotten admits. I was ready to start in a couple of months. But that summer school taught me maybe I like my fast paced life. And not saying that PhD is not fast paced, but it was not something I felt like it was aligned with my life at that point. And I wanted to try working in a big company. And I was fortunate enough back then that I got an offer from Facebook for their advertiser analytics team. And that was again a key point where I decided not to go for a PhD and instead go for like a master's program, which would help me get the basics of AI and ML ready. And then I can, maybe work in industry for a while and go back to PhD maybe sometime later, which actually never ended up happening. But I think like that was also like a key point in my life where to decide like what to do next. You should be always open to opportunities. It's not that something's set in stone. Like this is what the learning I've taken. Like you can always choose different paths at different points in life. You might have planned for something else. Like I had planned to be a professor and do a PhD and so on, but ended up never happening. So it's totally fine. And open to pivots is again after working in AdTech for a while at Twitter and Fair, which was again such learning experiences to learn how millions of users, when they use your technology, how satisfying it feels like a simple model change that you've done can lead to increase in the revenue of a company of these of the scale. So really gratifying, but also gives you a platform to grow further. So that's when I decided to pivot to startups. And then Gen AI started coming up. So, upskilling yourself, making sure you're up to date is also very important. And these key decisions or moments have, shaped my journey in so far. And yeah.
I think that's such a great reminder that one, it's okay to pivot, but more importantly, it's really important to listen to yourself and who you are, right? I mean, everybody would look like, oh, getting a PhD is such a great thing. You got accepted into this program. Like, it could be really hard at that point to say, no, I'm going to go a different path when everything else is telling you to go one way, but to really listen to yourself and say, but this is what I'm enjoying right now. And to follow that and to remember that it's okay to follow that part of yourself that's like, no, I need that fast-paced life, or I want to do more focused work and spend a couple years really diving deep into research. And so I appreciate you sharing that story because it's such a great reminder for all of us that listen to yourself and what brings you joy because that will not steer you wrong. You also have done a lot of work in mentoring women and just supporting women in tech initiatives. What piece of advice do you give to other women in tech?
One piece of advice is definitely, as I said, keep your eyes and ears open. You never know when a new opportunity comes up, and stay curious. And as I said, nothing is set in stone. It's okay if Plan A fails or you're not able to pursue something that you planned for so many years. Um, that would be my first piece of advice. And second is don't think that you are less than anyone. Always believe in your abilities. It does take time, but stay persistent and seek out supportive communities or build your inner circle so that they give you that boost of energy and boost of confidence. Always push your boundaries. Like, you are your own limitation. That's what I sometimes feel like. It's very essential to have that strong sense of self, and one day at a time. Like, I don't plan, things in future anymore because I've seen like plans change all the time. So that is definitely helpful. Like, have a sense of self, be confident in yourself. It does take time. You do come across these imposter syndrome. Oh, I'm not good for this. But have a faith in your abilities, and don't be afraid to voice your ideas or contributions.
I love that. Well, Jigyasa, thank you so much for taking the time and coming in and sharing your experience and work with us today. It truly is inspiring. And I highly encourage everyone to go check out her book, Sculpting Data for ML, the first act in machine learning. I think now more than ever, it's more important that we take that time to really curate the data. So, again, thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us and for all your work in the space and contributing to the community.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was definitely a fun moment chatting with you.
And a big thank you to our listeners. Remember to stay curious and keep learning. And we'll catch you next time on the Data Bites podcast. Bye bye, everybody. If you are enjoying the conversations you are hearing today, we encourage you to continue to be a part of the conversation and join a community of like minded, extraordinary women. With our free community membership, you're stepping into a realm where learning, networking, and growth are at the heart and soul of what we do. Connect with Women in Data's global community and network with our chapters all for free. But why stop there? Upgrade your membership with a special offer for DataBytes listeners by getting $20 off a pro membership, in which you'll receive access to over 300 classes, leadership training, and exclusive events. If you're interested in mentorship and networking, we've got you. From monthly thought leadership webinars to exclusive networking events and a diverse on-demand mentorship program, the connections you'll make here are boundless. Join us and be part of a vibrant network. Dive into our book clubs, growth groups, and industry-focused gatherings. Women in Data is not just a community. It's a movement, a place where innovators, changemakers, and leaders come together to shape the future. Visit womenindata.org to join or use the special discount code in the show notes. Together, let's drive change one data byte at a time.